your shape. But when we're talking about the 3D, then we're talking about a form. So maybe a cube is a form, however, a square is the shape. Thus, it has width, height, and depth. And next one is color. We just had a class on color theory the other day. So these are the basic things that you need to know about color. Hue is the purest color, or basically all the 12 colors that are occurring on your color wheel. So that will be your hue: pink hue, red hue, orange hue, etc. Value is how dark or light that particular color is. So, how close it is to the black or white on the spectrum, that is what defines your value of a particular color. And saturation is how intense a particular color is. So, as the intensity decreases, the object will become, the color will become grayer. So, in that respect, if you have to think of saturation, you think of your tones. Because when you keep adding grays, that's when you have tones. Next thing is value. It's I already described it in color, but value in a composition would mean uh, how dark or light a particular object, or like the shading that you're using, how dark and light it is, the direction that it is following. So where the light is falling on the object from, that will define the value. So you'll be able to understand where you should be placing your shadows depending on the source of light, and that will define the value of the particular object. Depending on how you're using the value in a particular object, you can either represent a object as static or dynamic. In dynamic, you'll be using uh, different tones and tints and shades. However, in static, you'll be using only one texture. So if you look at these two pictures, what we see is like we do not see any movement, or like we cannot, like it appears to be a flat piece of object. But when you look at this, it looks like a stone or something which has you can tell there is volume in it. So you can tell this is an object which is not 2D, it's 3D. So to make that particular distinction, we use value in design. Now, the next element we have is texture. Texture is basically the surface quality. It can be visual, it can also be tactical. So, tactile texture would be a texture you can touch and feel. So, there will be conversions on it, or maybe like lines on it that you can actually feel when you are touching that particular object. So, texture of a wall, the bricks that are there. So you feel the conversions of the bricks as you touch the wall. So that is the texture of the wall. Then texture of a paper. It's a little coarse, like whether it's a coarse paper or it's a plain paper or it's a glossy paper. So depending on that, the finish, the feel you get is what the texture is. So texture in drawing though, when you are making visual textures, there'll be like when we are doing shading, the things we do, hatching, or stripling. So all these methods are to achieve different textures in a particular composition. Next thing that we have in the elements of design is space. Space is how you define where the objects are going to end up in your composition, how you're going to place them in relation to each other. So while you're using this particular element, you need to keep in mind different principle of design like unity, harmony, so that the composition doesn't come out jarring, or you do not have extra space remaining, like the white space that we call. The negative space is the white space. So a lot of negative space in a composition distracts you from the emphasis of the object and the topic of the entire story. So what you should do is when you're using these different elements, you should always keep in mind that you're using certain principles, not all of them together, but maybe like three principles at a go, and then you'll be able to get towards a better composition. So, like in the next composition, we have, so this composition is telling you how to use white space effectively. So, the emphasis here is Napoleon, and it's pretty clear by using the repetitiveness of this geometrical shape, we're creating a particular rhythm in the picture. So we're repeating it and then we're creating rhythm. So one principle that we're using is rhythm. Then we have repetition. Then the space is being utilized by being the text is proportionately placed in the bottom while the image we have is on top, and the balance is created by this empty space that is juxtaposed with the image. Okay, so any doubts about elements of design, guys?
No, ma'am.
No, right? Another element of design that you might have at times in your compositions is text, but that is not considered an element. So I didn't include it. But when you're doing visual design, sometimes text is also important to keep in mind. So when you're using text in a composition, you have two options. Either you use serif fonts or sans serif. So depending on the kind of composition you have, the kind of feeling you're going for, whether it's a formal setting, it's an informal setting, you will be deciding the text based on that. It can be plain, it can be decorative, it can be made abstract, or you can modernize the silhouette of the text as well. Coming to principle of design help us decide where in composition which element should come and how to get a composition that wouldn't be considered a bad design. So I've tried to give examples wherever possible. Please keep your eyes on the screen. So balance is about creating equilibrium. Equilibrium is not exactly, so you don't go for the equal sort of a feeling in your composition. It is more about a balancing feeling. So it is not necessary that you're using same shape on both sides, or like you're just repeating that particular object. So it can be of different types you're balancing, and we'll be covering that when we go to the next slide. So symmetrical balance happens when you're using same objects, or like vertical, you're dividing the composition on the vertical or horizontal axis, and then you're using symmetrical elements to compose your picture. However, in asymmetry, you come up with way better compositions because it creates an element of interest in the composition. You don't have to, because why is balance important? Because you do not put all of your furniture in one corner of the room, you divide it all over the room in a way that it comes together. In the same way, you cannot crowd all of your heavy elements in one area of the composition to decide where what will come and how you'll create the balance. So if we take example of this particular slide only, so I cannot put all of my heavy elements in one space. Like I cannot start with the heading being the focus of the object. Otherwise, like if I just play focus on here, if I make it bold, if I make it darker, if I put another imagery here, so that will be imbalanced. In this case, what we're following is, so we have left side composition and we're following that in the text below, then we're going for a centered image because the image would be asymmetrical if we place it any other way, but we are balancing it with the text like here. So when you're creating balance in a visual, you cannot place two objects together. So if I place these two together, I get an imbalanced picture like this one. So here I'm using the principle of variety to make my composition more interesting, but it looks crowded if I put both of them in the center in the second option. So the first option is the correct way of using balance. When you have one object coming to the like closer to the center of the composition, then the element which should come next should be much farther from it. So right, it can be opposite of the mirror of, image. The four types of balances that we can have is symmetrical balance. So this you follow this direction when you're looking one, two, three, four. This is the direction. So this is the first one, symmetrical balance, wherein you have the same repetition on either side of the page. Then you have approximate symmetry, wherein you have these three elements being divided and but placed in symmetry with this emphasized element over here. So this is your approximate symmetry. And the radial symmetry is achieved when you have a circle or a circular forms occurring with each other. So that is like radial symmetry is the easiest to understand. Then we come to asymmetry. Asymmetry should follow the rule that I just mentioned. So when you have asymmetrical balance, you should place your objects like this and not crowd them in the center like this. This is an example of a balanced composition. So it's a poster for a web series. So we see the elements being utilized in the particular composition. So we have text here, then we have the silhouettes occurring here so that it's not crowding in one space. It's not, everything is not centered. Next element we have is emphasis. Emphasis is where the focus of the composition is. So when you're creating an infographic or a poster or a composition, you should be asking yourself that what is the most important information that I want to give my audience or my client, whoever you're designing that particular thing for. So, when you decide what is most important, you make it the focus by putting it in the center, like not necessarily putting it in the center, but you can also make it the focus of the composition by making it either the bigger one or you can use a contrasting color. So, we studied about the color schemes. So, you can use a contrasting color for the object you want to make the emphasis, and you can use muted colors for other ones, or like the key color that you are considering. While creating emphasis and object in a composition, it's important that you play it out in your head, that you stencil it out how you're going to place it in the composition. So it's always suggested that to create emphasis, you create a template sort of a thing for your composition before, so that you can place all the important focal points and not miss out on the balance. You can also decide which is the dominant object, subdominant object, or the subordinate object, and place focus or place emphasis on those in that order. So there you'll be following the principle of hierarchy. So the dominant object should be the object that should be catching your eye first, and then your eye should go to subdominant object, and then it should move to subordinate objects or the objects which are not that important to the composition. So this is here the focus is the guitar and the heading. So the poster design is focusing on this particular music element of the concert. Hence, the emphasis of this image is the guitar. Now, looking at this this particular picture. So the first example we see, if we're using lines in n number of directions, there is no one particular direction that our eye can follow. So my eye can go here also. This looks like emphasis, but then I have lines going in every direction. There is no proportion. So to be able to focus on a particular direction is one important thing for emphasis. So here there is an easy direction my eye can follow. Like I don't have to move it here and there. There were too many lines, too many horizontal lines for my eye to follow. Here I just have these two lines side by side. In the second example, if I have same size objects in a composition, it is hard to emphasize on any one of them. So this is like I can't tell which should be my focus. But when I use a bigger object or and I use multiple smaller objects in the backdrop, then this becomes my emphasis. The bigger object becomes my emphasis. Same way, uh, monotonous shapes, same sized. So there is not one shape that is dominating because there are circles also, there are rectangles also. In this one though, we have one circle and multiple rectangles. So we know where to focus. So to create that focal point is what emphasis is about. Next one, movement. Movement in a particular design is the visual flow, the flow that your eye or the direction that your eye should take when looking at a particular composition. So we can, like I mentioned, when we think of lines being static or dynamic, the static lines are the ones that create the sense of stability. The dynamic lines are the lines that create the sense of movement. So these straight lines, which are the vertical horizontal lines, will make you give you the feeling of solidity, or like the thing is, or the object being standing at one particular place, like not moving. So for movement, it's suggested that we use dynamic lines, which are diagonal lines, zigzag lines, or curves. So the curvilinear lines imply movement. They can communicate movement also at times by indicating the path of a particular object. So if you have to show a ball being thrown, so that ball, when you are drawing the ball, you also make lines behind it to show which direction it has been thrown from. So that there, what you're doing is you're using the principle of movement to indicate the path of the ball. So if we look at the poster, our eye knows, like, so it is giving us multiple directions to go, but we still know where to follow. So after this, we come to this, then we come to this, then we come here, and then we come up to this particular. So this diagonal line happening here in the visual, this is what is creating movement in the entire visual. Also, the text is creating movement because it's not placed in simply, like it's not placed simply, it's placed in different directions, but directions that follow one after another. The different colors being used, the different fonts being used are adding variety to the composition and thus giving us a harmonious composition in all. This particular painting, it uses irregular shapes, but it gives you the repetition in a way that it makes you feel like there is a certain movement in certain directions. So your eye follows the directions. So to make the viewer follow the direction that you want, or that you want them to notice a particular composition in, is the point of movement. So using movement in a composition is to just direct a particular person to what the focal point and the other noticeable elements of the object are. For example, like when you're a very good example for this in real life would be VM. So visual merchandising, when you're doing it for a store, you're defining the path that the person entering the store is going to take. So from the entry point to which stall he's going to go next, from there, where will he head next? So defining this path is all about, like, is all there is in movement. So that definition has to be there in the composition. So these were the lines I was mentioning when I was mentioning the ball. So the movement is happening from right upwards, upward to the right. Yeah. Here we have, like, we cannot directly see the movement, but the shadow happening in the backdrop and the fact that she is dancing, the movement of the skirt, the movement of the hand, that is giving us the feeling of the movement. Also, because the placement of the object in the uh, composition is such that we can tell there is a dancing activity going on. So you can also imply movement. It is not necessary that you have to follow lines to show the direction only. So this is implied movement. In art, you see most example of these, but in compositions, you'll come across the directional lines and the lines where you, or maybe no lines, which are visible directly, like in this particular poster we had. Coming to pattern, a pattern is nothing but a simple repetition of a particular element or a motif in a design. Patterns will have one element repeating into different, so there can be different types of patterns. There can be drop patterns, then there can be repeat patterns, half drop repeat, etc., etc. So we don't need to go into that detail that much, but basically understanding what a pattern is, it's a collection of forms in a particular order which creates a harmonious relation, and it is proportionate most of the time. There can be abstract patterns, like you can have, so patterns can be also seen in the way you see a particular print. So prints are nothing but patterns. So this is one print which can be example of a pattern. Your wallpapers are different patterns. So the repetition that you see happening, then it's following a particular rhythm. So pattern, when in most of the times patterns are rhythmic. Repetition, repetition is to create consistency in your particular design or composition. Through repetition, you can also achieve harmony in a composition. Repetition is the easiest way to get rhythm. Rhythm is the way that, or like a tonality of the composition. So here we've used the method of gradation. We're using white, then we have gray triangles, white, gray. So this repeat happening, it adds interest to the composition. It's not necessary that the repeat would be proportionate only. It can be uneven, it can be a radiation, maybe like the heartbeat. So that is a rhythmic repeat. So if I use, using repetition is not very tricky, but to add interest to a repeat is what is the tricky part. So if I use repetition without variety, in that case it is these boring, so it becomes boring if I don't use variety. So here I also use the element, the principle of design variety, wherein I have different things occurring, but the same, sorry, the same shape is being used in different variations. Hence, we are like, this is way more creative than this is. Repetition being used in a poster design. Most of the times, rhythm, repetition, and patterns occur side by side. So, most of the times, these three principles you see in a composition occurring together. Next one is proportion. Proportion is the relationship of two or more elements in a design and how they compare to each other. So it is said to be harmonious when there is a correct relationship between the elements, uh, be it in respect to the size or be it in respect to the quantity. A bad proportion would be when this thing is not happening, when you do not have any harmony with respect to the size or with respect to the color, quantity, etc. Having a good proportion in a composition is important as it will give you harmony, it will give you symmetry, it will help you achieve balance in your composition. So, to create balance in a composition, here what we have is one huge circle, and then to balance it out, we're using a smaller circle on the opposite side. So, it's the directional. So, if we look at it, it's a diagonal direction we are following. Same way, diagonal direction, we're using the same proportion in different repeats, different colors. So the ratio is increasing relatively, hence it is a proportional composition. These are examples of bad proportion, good proportion. These are bad proportion and good proportion because we want to create interest in the object. So, like if you were to look at it, it's not equally divided. If you look at the triangle, it's not equally divided. However, these two are equally divided. So, when we look at these are proportionate. But why do they call it bad proportion? Because it's creating a monotonous feeling. It's not very interesting to look at. But when I'm using only one third, so I'm marking only one third, I'm shading only one third, I'm coloring only one third. In that case, there is an interesting aspect to the composition, and hence we'll call it a good proportion. So it's not about the measurements that much it is about how the composition's result would look. However, if we make it too unequal also, that also creates a lack of harmony. It's like towing that thin line. So you have to be inside that thin line, you have to keep creating interest but still not go too off the road. These are some examples of proportionate compositions. This is a proportionate poster design for poker run for a game night, I'm assuming. I have no clue. However, the second one is these people performing dance. So you see proportion. So they've balanced it out by using people in different poses, and this is how they've used proportion. So none of them is bigger compared to each other if you look. So they're all in same proportion. So the ratio remains the same. So if I were to enlarge one of them and use that element, if we use a larger element, what will happen is compared to the other figures, it is out of proportion as the emphasis of the composition will change to the bigger picture, and thus it will become disproportionate. Here, there is a particular movement that is happening. So there is, like, if I follow it, there is a form of a circle that is, I get. So here they're using proportion with relation to each other. So if I have a big object here, they're making it so diagonally opposite. We have another object. We have things in the backdrop. So we are not placing everything in a straight line. When you're doing this particular element, you're not placing everything in a straight line. You're placing it with relation to other elements. So if one thing is occurring here, maybe in the composition, the second thing will occur here. It won't be under it. because that will leave out a lot of white space, a lot of negative space. Then there is Fibonacci's spiral that we can follow for the best proportion. So it is said that Fibonacci's spiral or the golden proportion occurs in nature in almost everything. So be it your branches, leaves, trees, everything organic, even the human figure. So all of them are according to golden proportion. So this is the Fibonacci spiral. Using the spiral, if you can learn how to use the Fibonacci spiral, it'll be great. Using it, it's the best method to make layouts and place things proportionately to each other. Next element we have is rhythm. Rhythm suggests any action or movement by alternating or repeating the elements that are there. So if we look at this particular image, we have the repeat of this element happening thrice and the repeat of this element happening twice. So we're creating a pattern. So again, the pattern rhythm thing I was saying, it comes together because usually, like, we're not using just one element to create a composition or a design, we're using more than one. So here also we'll have the repetition, we'll have the pattern, we'll have rhythm. So this is the example of your regular rhythm. When you were talking about flowing or progressive rhythm, would be when regular would be the same thing throughout. Flowing would be you see the movement happening in the particular object. And then progressive is when it starts smaller, it becomes bigger. So flowing example can be your heartbeat because there you cannot define where it goes up, goes down, you never know. Progressive can be maybe some sort of music, like maybe trance music, wherein like it starts with less BPMs, goes on to higher BPMs. Any music which has that sort of a setting that will work for the progressive example. Rhythm is best understood from the perspective of music because it's talking about the tonality of the design. So in this first example, this particular painting, we're using the repetition of this shape, then the repetition of this shape, but in a particular pattern. So this pattern, also the color that we have, the different patterns that we have inside, so the repeated patterns that are also creating a sense of rhythm for us. Here we have repetition of lines, shapes, or colors. So it's making our eyes go from one point to another, and hence the rhythm is achieved by this particular movement that is happening of the eye. So it goes from here, then it comes here, down, up, down. So this movement that is happening, this is the rhythm of the particular composition. This rhythm, so the eye following these movements is the rhythm. So that is the main difference between movement and rhythm. Then we have, again, this is example of your second type of rhythm, which is your flowing rhythm. Don't have the same repetitive things. Flowing rhythm again, flowing rhythm again. Next element we have is harmony. Harmony is what is achieved through different elements of design and different principles of design. Harmony is the satisfying effect that happens when different objects or the elements of a particular composition come together aesthetically. So nothing is being out of place, nothing is disproportionate. Then if there is a repeat, it's following the order or it's following a pattern. There is certain harmony about it. There is certain rhythm about it. So a balance must be reached in order to get a harmonious composition. So this is when I have this object completely inside the second shape. So these two forms, they're creating good harmony. But when I have it imbalanced, like in this one, so certain edges are touching the ends, then certain edges are not even reaching the other end of the sphere circle. Same here, like in this, the triangle is placed such that it's taking all the attention away from other shape, and this is becoming the emphasis of the composition, which shouldn't happen. Here I can place equal importance on both the elements. I can look at both the elements and I'm not disturbed while looking at it. So that feeling of disturbance, if it's lacking the feeling of disturbance, then in that case, your composition is harmonious. This particular painting here, by using the repetitive brick texture, the shapes of the windows, then the same shape being repeated here, but in different sizes. So we're using proportion, we're using forms, we're using repeats, and we're following a particular rhythm. If you look at it, there is a particular movement when my eye is going to follow. And thus, we're creating a harmonious composition. Also, the colors should not be too clashing. So, like if I look at it, it should follow. So, if I use a good color scheme, the color schemes that I mentioned the other day. So, if you use a good color scheme, if your objects used are proportionate, uh, and you're using a repeated or a patterned element in your composition, in that case, you can achieve harmony easily. Someone wants to say something? Okay. Next element we have is variety. Variety can be defined as basically different combinations that are occurring in your composition. So if I'm making a composition with people, so I cannot be making all. So if I'm making a crowd, so I can't make all men in the crowd or men of the same 5'5" height. I can't do that. So to make it more interesting, what I'll do is I'll make someone a little taller, I'll make someone smaller, I'll make someone thin, I'll make someone fat. So that variety that I'm adding to my elements. So my element is people. So people can be many kinds. So this people, if I can repeat only one kind of a person, then it will be a monotonous repetition or a monotonous crowd. But if I want to create an interesting crowd, I need variation. That's all about variety. So when I'm creating this variation using values, different lines, textures, shapes, and hues, then I'm asking the viewer to pay extra attention to my composition, and there is some visual interest that will be added to the composition. So here we have the same shape but in different colors, in different, so some are colored, some are not colored, some are of a different size, and thus it looks quite nice. So, which is quite opposite of this one. So, if I look at this one, what I see is it's just four circles. It's quite monotonous. It's not something that like it's probably like something that won't be considered a good composition. But to have a good composition, we can have variety being used. So like here we have two circles, different colors, then two rhombuses, different sizes. So the size, color, you can have unity. So here I can probably call this unity, but I can't call this variety. But this is variety. So this is variety. Unity is whether, so unity is very close to harmony. Harmony is when all of the things come together and they do not disturb the eye. But unity is when you look at a particular composition, there shouldn't be a feeling that there should have been something more to a composition. So the completeness, the feeling of everything coming together as one is what unity is about. For unity, I don't know if you guys have covered Gestal's theory. Have you? If you want, you can refer. It's not necessary from your exam point of view, but you can check out Gestalt's laws, which are similarity, proximity, continuance, etc., closure. So these are all things you'll be studying about once you read about that. So it comes from Gestalt's theory of visual perception in psychology. So it basically tells you about the relation between the ground figure. So how you should be balancing different elements of a composition. So using unfinished images to make it look, so closure is when you do not have all the information being presented to you, but your mind can perceive that this particular object is going to look like this. So if you look at this image, i I see dotted lines. I don't have a circle, but when my mind sees it, I can perceive it as a circle. So this is what unity is about. Then this one, I don't have a triangle with lines. I have three circles like Pac-Man's placed like this. Thus, it's giving me a feeling of a triangle here. So this is what unity. When it works together to make a complete image, the completeness is unity. So in a composition, how can you use unity? So if I have, like, take this example, this is what they're saying is a bad composition. So because the eye has to go from there, then here, and like there is no connect in between two. So it's not coming together as one image or one composition. So there is to add that connection, if we add a road or a link, or if we can put trees and connect it with trees in between, in that case it becomes a better composition as my eye has a certain direction to follow. Also there is not a disconnect between the objects in the image, so these there is a disconnect happening, so this disconnect has to be avoided. That is what unity in a composition is about. Then the same thing that I mentioned when I was covering proportion. So when you have two objects like in a composition, so here we have these two boats, then we have one boat over here. So this looks like an interesting composition, but when, because there is no linear direction only. But if I make everything in the same line, here I have a vertical line. But if I make the same thing in a straight line, it becomes weird. It doesn't look as nice as this composition does. So that relation that make unites or breaks a particular composition. And this is one element contrast, which can be used to emphasize also. So when you're using contrast in a composition, you can draw the emphasis of the entire composition to that focal point. So here the focal point would be maybe this and this particular panther. So through contrast, like we have very contrasting colors here. Through contrast, we're adding interest to the object, and like you can see the foreground background relation very clearly. Like, so there is no confusion between the lines. In case your composition lacks contrast, it can be and it contains text. The text becomes unreadable. The moment it becomes unreadable, it becomes a bad design. So if you ever have text in your composition, no matter what kind of composition it is, you should use proper contrast. You should make sure that it's emphasized so as to not lose out on the readability aspect, because text is the main reason we have text, or the purpose we have text is so that it can be read and we can get some information through it. Then these are some examples where we're using more than one element of design or with a principle of design. So here we're using point line rhythm. So there is rhythm being, so it's becoming a rhythmatic pattern by usage of different lines and dots. So it's a regular rhythm because it's the same all over. Then using different proportions of, so we have one shape being used in different proportions to make a particular form. I just repeated the last image, I think, here. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, dynamic line, a dynamic line, a broken line. So, there are lines, I can see the movement, and there is rhythm because of the repeat that is happening. So, the broken line being repeated is creating the rhythm and the direction. So, the movement and the direction. Most of the times, you have movement and rhythm together. And this is one example of unity and variety being used together. So, because we're using the same color, we have the factor of unity. But because we have different sizes of the same shape being used, we have the variety. In the same way, the variety in this case is different colors, and the unity is the same size or the same shape. So, like, can you tell me what are the different principle of design elements of design you see in this particular composition?
Repetition, rhythm,
Repetition, definitely. Is there
Proportion,
proportion?
variety,
Variety, definitely. What else?
Movement.
pattern,
Movement, pattern. So this composition has a lot of principles of designs, and elements are definitely like that. Like, so forms I can see lines, I can see space also is being used.
sure.
So everything in here, just tell me, is the entire thing clear? Is there something you want me to repeat or something you have questions about, guys? Someone put something in the chat. Ma'am, how to make movement look 3D? I know only one way. So, how to make movement look 3D? In what sense are we talking about? Like, are we talking about an object? Are we talking about a composition? Three dimensional? I'm not trying to. Reem, I'm not able to understand the question. How to make it look 3D though?
I guess overlapping is one way.
3D is the part I don't get. How would the movement be 3D? Movement is directional, right? Okay, overlapping could be one way.
Ma'am, hear me?
Yeah, is this Reem?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, tell me, Reem.
Ma'am, actually, I was asking was in while using in posters or something, I
Hmm.
used, let's say, a train coming in, right?
Yeah,
Nearby looks very larger, and then the people in it's very small. But let's say
hmm.
curve that we generally, it's a very common one that we
Yeah,
use a train on a curve, right?
hmm.
uh, a road, curved road. So in that, what you have is you have to take in the front, and then behind there's a very thin tapering end, right?
Yeah,
So like that shows that it's coming towards you outside, and it's coming in like a curved shape, right?
yes.
Curved. So that shows that kind of movement. But that is the only one that I know. I want to know how I can create more movements of roads. It's like that.
Okay.
So how to create that, because I get confused with that. I can create movement of people and movement of letters, but the
Hmm.
movement of that way, like as if they're coming out towards the page, coming towards that. Other than the curved one, I don't know anything else I want to ask.
Okay. So the curve is the easiest way to show the movement actually.
Yes, that's why.
But the same method if you use no like showing the things that are closer to you bigger and the show. So when you see roads, what you see is it getting broader on your side and gets smaller as it goes further, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that that is the only way to achieve movement in roads, I think. To show the bigger and the perspective, to show the perspective basically.
That I understand on the fact that it needs to be bigger towards the front and smaller towards the end.
Yeah, yeah.
But how to show that it's as if it's coming out towards you. Uh, that perspective is there where when you show that it's bigger and smaller, but it can be on the fact that it's just normal. It looks sometimes when you do that, it just looks normal. In that curved one, it looks as if it's coming out of the page from somewhere. So like that, I want to ask because I've tried finding it and I can't find it. That's why I tried finding it on Google.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say. Like I'm trying to think in like how I can help you out with that. Because the only ways we know to do movement is doing this representational way. Like either you show the lines that are following. So if you're showing something speeding, you show the lines behind them or which direction they're coming from. Let me like find out on my own if I
And
could find some ways.
we can use foreshortening for doing that.
We can use what?
Means using the effect like something is very bigger in
Yeah,
front of
that is exactly what we said. No, right now, like Reem said, she knows how to do that. So the things that are close to you appear way bigger, and the things that are farther look very small. So it gets one point perspective thing only mainly.
yeah.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, ma'am. That can also create
Hmm. That's
movement.
one method.
Ma'am, overlapping can't be done in that case or what?
Overlapping, I don't understand. Like, in what way are you saying overlapping? So overlapping as in?
Like to show something coming towards us.
Mm-hmm.
If the objects are placed in a row
Yeah.
and
Oh, okay. So yes. Okay, I understand.
yeah,
So
so
maybe a car, and then in the back you have more cars and everything.
yeah, or maybe besides car there are stones and then the car is
Hmm.
coming through it. I don't know
Ma'am, for
if
those
it would
kind of
So
work.
relating it with other objects in the composition and then showing the movement.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that is one thing that is possible. Any other question? Okay, Reem, I'll check with other teachers also and I'll get back to you, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
And the suggestions that all the kids gave, you should keep them in mind, okay?
Okay, ma'am, it's not a problem.
All right. Any other questions?
No, other than movement now.
Okay. So like even when you look at this particular image, no? So I have lines following. So I don't have a particular way to show movement and I do it. Same way here also I can't really tell if I don't know the context of the picture. I can't tell that this person is moving. Because I know the context through the story that the painter is giving me, I can tell there is movement. So even this shadow thing is one thing, like so where the shadows are falling. The shadows will become hazy if a thing is moving. Any other questions regarding any other element of design or a principle of design, guys? Do you want me to share this presentation with you?
In the app.
Huh?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, in the app, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm in the app. Where could we find this presentation?
This presentation is not in the app, it's a presentation I made just now. So I'll
Like
just give it
whenever
to
you
sir.
will upload.
Yeah, I'll give it to sir. Got it, sir. Okay. And yesterday's presentation I shared with one of the kids, the
Yes,
color
you
theory
did.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ma'am, by the way, where can we find these PDFs and everything? Because I can't find it in the app.
You can't find the PDFs.
No, not in
See,
the app.
are you talking about my PDFs?
Yes, the ones that you take for class.
I think I'll have to share it with sir and he'll share with you. Because
Yeah.
I don't have access to the app, right? So I don't upload it. I usually just take classes and keep the things with me.
Hmm.
So I'll just share it with sir, okay? And he'll upload everything.
Yeah, no, that is why I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Because I can't
Okay.
find it. Yeah.
Yeah. And also like, yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't claim to own any of the content in this. Like I have made this, I've put it together, but obviously these are not my designs and drawings. Okay, guys. If there are no questions, I'd like to conclude the session. I hope you guys can make better compositions after this. I hope this is helpful.
Ma'am, can you share this PDF on the chat over here?
It's a presentation.
Yes, presentation, PDF, anything.
Okay, I'll make it a PDF and send. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, can you send it in the chat then? Because that way I
Yeah.
can get it right now.
Let me just download it and give. Got it? Okay, guys. Then please
I didn't
download
get
the
it.
presentation. It's on the chat. I think it might be because the internet is a little slow. Okay, download it quickly because like once the session ends, you won't be able to.
Ma'am, have you sent it?
Yeah, I have sent it. I'll do one thing. I'll mail it to the same girl I made the color theory presentation to.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am, I'll forward it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, guys. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
nice
you, ma'am.
day. Bye bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Hi everyone, my name is Arnisha Das and I have scored 159.5 marks in Nata exam. Today I am here to share my great experience with the Ignite India education. As I passed class 12 this year, I was preparing for the Nata exams and the syllabus was of previous year, which consists of aptitude, PCM and drawing. But due to this pandemic situation, Nata conducted its home-based exams online. Due to this, they have to change their syllabus and proposed cognitive skills, which consist of PTQ type questions and MCQs in place of drawing. Earlier, I have don't any idea about what is PTQ type questions. After searching through YouTube, I came to know about the Ignite India Education, which was conducting free online classes and mock tests in it. I would thank Mr. Krishna Singh sir, who teaches us very well and explained every little thing very well. They were also solving all the queries regarding the new syllabus. They were also giving time to time updates regarding the Nata exams. Lastly, I would like to thank Mr. K. Krishna Singh sir and Ignite India family for helping us and giving me the opportunity for giving the feedback in this platform. Thank you.